Hi, we're here for Free Advice Fridays with our special guest, Annalisa Parent. Annalisa is a writing coach. She is also the owner and operator of Date with the Muse. And we are so excited to have her here on Free Advice Fridays with us so that we can pick her brain on all her writing tips and just all of her knowledge in the publishing industry. So, Annalisa, thank you for joining us and taking your time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Keri. I'm excited to do this.
Yeah, for sure. So tell us a little bit about, have you always been a writer? How did you get started?
I would say I've always been a storyteller. So from day one, whenever I could talk, I was telling stories and making up jokes and then eventually writing stories. And I published my first poem at 9. So I was not only hooked on telling stories, but also writing them and publishing them from a very young age. It was always really important to me. And then, after a certain age, I had published enough pieces and gotten enough book contracts that my friends started to say, hey, that looks cool. How do I do that? And then their friends and the circle sort of grew. And so I started helping people to publish along the way too. I'm a teacher from way back. Teaching and writing are my two passions and really my vocation. And as a writing coach, I'm able to help authors to live the author dream. So to not only figure out how to write one book, but to turn writing into a career.
I love that. And do you, in your personal experience, because I know you wrote a book, and do you have a copy of that? Can you show us?
Yeah. So my book on writing is called Storytelling for Pantsers, How to Write and Revise Your Novel Without an Outline. And there's our little pantser there flying by the seat of his pants.
I love it. And for those of us who may not know, a pantser is someone who doesn't totally plot out their book. They kind of let the story lead them, right?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question. So I speak at a lot of writing conferences and people come up to me and say, oh, well, that's not for me. I'm an outliner. And, I talk to them. Let's just start from the place of there's no right way to write except the right way for yourself. And that's the very best thing to find. And so what I find is that it isn't a dichotomy. There aren't pantsers and outliners and we're going to go to war against each other. There's a spectrum of people.
Right.
And so there are two things that one must do in order to write a book. You must write and you must organize. And some people organize and write and organize and write. And some people write, organize, write, organize, write, organize. There's no right way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the two things that you have to do. And so outliners like to think that they're organizing first and writing second. And pantsers tend to sort of write and then say, oh gosh, I need to organize this.
Okay, that's good to know. And it's important also, does your book have like tips on, if you're a pantser and maybe not the most organized person, how, like different ideas of how to organize to kind of help along those who maybe aren't the best in that area?
Well, I actually take a step back and I get into the thinking that's really important in the process, right? So it doesn't matter if you're a messy desk person or a neat desk person. Although interestingly, what I've found is that many, many pantsers are people who in their real lives, like their jobs and their home lives and that kind of thing, tend to be pretty organized. And then their creativity misbehaves. It says, no, forget it. I'm not going to follow those rules. And so these are people who want to get that creativity, and I'm totally guilty of this, to be more organized. And so it maybe feels less organized than it actually is. So there's a word of encouragement, right? The writers that I work with are usually like, oh my gosh, look at this mess. And I'm like, okay, well, here's a piece and here's a piece. Now all we have to do is make this little bridge, right? So it's often less of a mess than writers feel like it is.
Yeah, that's really good. So I love that. And I love that you're you're giving hope to people who aren't organized, because in real life, I am actually a very organized person. When I go to write something, I have like 5 different pieces and I'm like, I know they fit together, but I don't know how. It drives me a little nuts. But when it comes together, I'm like, oh, that wasn't so hard.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Yeah, I love that.
That feels really consistent to me with what I've seen across the board.
In your experience, do pantsers maybe hesitate to actually finish a novel? Do they take longer to finish a novel?
don't know if they take longer, but yes, I mean, they tend to, because there's no cohesion and you can't really see the whole, right? You're like, well, I've got a beginning and a couple of things in the middle, and I'm pretty sure he goes from here to there, but I don't know how. And then at the end, it's going to end up like this. Well, that's not a novel. We'll forget it. I'm not a writer, right? I think that's a lot of the thought process that goes on for pantsers. Well, it is a novel because it's a novel up here. You know, the trick, and I think one of the things that I have as a superpower, if I'm allowed to say that I have a superpower, is helping writers to see, okay, where are the pieces? How can we put this together? And I work with outliners and I work with pantsers, because outliners have their own problems. If you plan everything in advance and then you write it, well, then there's a whole lot of fill-in that needs to happen in the revision. So pantsers are subtractors, right? We overwrite and we have to take stuff away. We're killing our darlings left and right.
Yes.
Outliners are like, oh gosh, I only have 35,000 words and I need 80,000. What do I do now? Okay, now we're adding it.
Right, right. Well, that's really interesting. Now we have Jules, and she's asking, I wrote my first novel as a pantser. My sequel is like pulling teeth. So I tried doing some organizing, but it's just still not working. It's like the traditional definition of writer's block. My imaginary friends are not talking to me. Do you have any advice on how Jules can go from pantsing her first book to trying to pull some cohesion in for her second book in the series?
Sure, absolutely. So, you know, I think if you threw this question at most panelists at a writers conference, you know, they'd say, you know, go for a walk in the woods, brainstorm, draw a picture. I mean, there are a million ways that we can get into the creative zone. But all of the work that I do is based on neuroscience. And here's what I can tell you. Anytime that you have writer's block, it's because you're afraid. You're afraid of something. You're afraid that it's not going to be as good as the last one, that it won't be as easy as the last one, that it won't sell as well, that it will be better than the last one, that your agent won't like it, that people won't buy it. There's a fear there that's keeping you, Jules, I'm sorry, from finishing that book. And, you know, so the work that we do is about finishing books, but it's a lot about, let's tap into what the real fear is. Let's get in there. Let's hear the voice of your third grade teacher. And let's say, okay, thank you, third grade teacher, for telling me that. But I'm going to move on and write this book anyway, because I can, and I'm a really good writer.
I love that. I absolutely adore that. So basically you say, now, do you have any tactics or help or ideas on how to get over that fear? Like, is it literally just doing it, or are there some really concrete ways that we can get over the fear?
No. So this is where the neuroscience comes in. And, you know, if that really resonated with people, a third of this book is about how to get over the fear of writing. So, you know, and real strategies based on the way that the brain works. So, you know, when we are afraid of something, we go immediately into fight or flight, right? We're going to fight or we're going to run away. And that happens in our reptilian brain, right? The oldest part of our brain, the part of the brain that even reptiles have, right? But in order to have higher cognition, we need to be here in our neocortex, right? And so our reptilian brain, it's called emotional hijacking, is like, oh my gosh, I'm afraid I need to get out of here. Well, that you can't write in that condition, right? And so it's retraining your brain to do what I just said, right? We always say, thank you, inner critic. I need you so that I don't do things like run through traffic, right?
Very important.
Let's not do that. Thank you for being there, inner critic. I choose not to listen to you right now.
That's really interesting. Now, you keep bringing up neuroscience. How did you study this? Like, where did this come from?
Yeah, so I studied neuroscience at MIT in their brain imaging lab and also at Boston University, working on the integration of neuroscience and creativity. So how do we get our brains to get into creative flow, to be in that state? And we all love this state as writers, right? When you just like, your pen won't stop. The ideas
it's like runner's high for writers. Yeah.
It's amazing. And so our writers over in the writing gym experience that every single day because we're getting their brains into that zone. And that's how they finish their books and finishing them well in 8 weeks. It's, you know, we're working with their brains instead of against their brains.
That is crazy. I love it, but that is crazy to me. It just blew my mind just a little bit. Um, so we have David here from North Carolina, and he is saying that the last 4 of his novels out of a 10-book spy series were written as a pantser, and he finds it more fun, and his creativity is much broader without the confines of the outlining. So I think that's funny for someone who's kind of trying or is purposely switching over to kind of release their creativity in their writing so that they can expand. I think that's a fun thing.
I can really relate to that. You know, we had a writer who came in, and when she joined the writing gym, she said, "But I want you to know, I am an outliner." I said, "That's fine. You can be an outliner. All writers are welcome here, right?" And 6, 8 months into the various projects that she and I went through, she said, "You know, it's a lot more fun to work as a pantser." And all of my writer's block was coming from my expectations on myself that I outline. And this is one of the things that I rail against is many, many writers who were kids, all of us, right, heard from a teacher at some point, like, you must outline, you must outline.
Yes.
And there are circumstances in which it makes sense to outline. And I kind of want to like bring the old-fashioned ruler right back to those teachers and be like, don't say that. Because you absolutely do need to organize, right? We're not just going to like write some stream of consciousness thing and try to publish it. Like that phase of literature is over. We're done with that. Right? We did that in the early 20th century. But so in order to have a publishable piece, we do need to organize it, but that doesn't mean that we need to start with an outline. We can, but we don't have to. That's right, Erica, you are not Virginia Woolf. Like, we're done with her. She was great. We went to the lighthouse. It was amazing.
Right. So kind of on that, I have a question, or we had a question come in from Brenna, and Brenna said, I have an outline. I have my whole book planned out. I can picture the story. I could even start the story in the middle, but I can't get those first couple of chapters out. Do you have any advice on how to work through that?
Yes. Start in the middle. Start in the middle and see where it goes, right? I mean, and if the middle goes to the end, great. If the middle suddenly says, well, wait a minute, how do we get here? I better start back here. And that's where you're giving yourself permission to be a pantser. If your book wants to start itself in the middle, start itself in the middle. We acknowledge that's probably not going to be page 1. And that's okay. Nobody ever said you had to start writing your book on page 1. Now look, I wish that I could sit down and write a book, right? We all kind of have this myth, like, oh, you start on page 1 and then you go to page 2.
Go through, yep.
That might be true for some people, but it's not true for everyone, right? So the first question on the back of my book is, have you started a novel at least 68 times, the same novel, and only written the first chapter? Write chapter 1, then chapter 5, and then chapter 2, right? It's okay to bounce around or not even know if this is chapter 5. That's fine. Let's get the story out first, and then let's worry what goes in the beginning, middle, and end, and what's chapter 5 and what's chapter 8.
Right, and kind of backfill. I like that a lot. Now, if someone does that, is there a higher risk of maybe scenes not making sense or details not lining up, or do you find that's not the case?
Oh, absolutely. In my revision yesterday morning, my characters started on the balcony, went inside to the dining room table, and then suddenly took a nap on the balcony. Right? That was fine in the writing,
Right.
but it doesn't work in the revision, right? And that's why revision is so important. We can't just write our books during NaNoWriMo and publish them and expect people to love them and read them, because things don't make sense when we're in the creative phase. And that's part of the fun, and it's okay. But if we're going to publish, then we need to revise and make it make sense.
Right, and be open to revision and, beta readers and people who are reading it with fresh eyes saying, this doesn't really make sense. So we have to be open to that.
Absolutely.
I love it. We have Miss Linda, and Linda is saying, what is one question you wish someone would ask you? If you have one bit of advice that you're really hoping someone asks you this question, what would it be?
Well, I'm kind of a pantser, so I don't ever have any preconceived notions. But Keri, you just mentioned beta readers, and beta readers are one of my soapboxes. Because, from a neuroscientific standpoint, feedback can short circuit the creative process. And we've all had this happen, right? You're like, oh, this is so great. Take a look at what I just wrote. And someone's like, your character's stupid or whatever, right? And then you can't write for, or you never go back to that project. And we've all had some kind of experience like that. So when we're looking for feedback, there are two types of feedback. There's reader feedback, and this is like, think fourth grade book report, right? I liked it. The characters were nice. I love the part where, like readers can give you that kind of feedback. But if you want the kind of feedback that is my plot working? Do I have cohesive character arcs? Have I interwoven the multiple character arcs efficiently? Are my red herrings red herring enough? Right. Those aren't questions for readers. Those are questions that readers are going to derail you on every time because they're thinking about what they like, right? Like your neighbor isn't going to fix your car for you. Maybe they're a mechanic. Maybe they understand like how to put that belt on, but probably not. Like you want to take it to the mechanic. So if you want real advice that's going to make your story move forward in the same way that you want your car to move forward, take it to a professional.
And that professional would be, in general, a writing coach or an editor.
A writing coach, developmental editor, someone who actually understands story structure, and even more than that, understands the market and what's publishable, right? If Dickens, flashed himself into today, he's a marvel for the 1850s. No one's going to publish a novel that opens with a paragraph-long sentence in 2020. It's not going to happen.
I have to go revise my book now. Hang on.
Sorry. Tale of Two Cities has been done.
Darn it. And that's so true. And I think a really important part is your mom, your sister, your best friend is not an editor. They may read your book, but they are not an editor. They haven't been trained to look for certain things, to look for holes and backfill. Because we get that all the time. Oh, well, this was edited. And I'm like, really? Who was your editor? Oh, well, I'm like, yeah, no, that's not an editor.
I think they love you, and because they know you so intimately, they're also hearing your voice, and so they're not able to look at that critically in a way that an outside person could and should.
Right. And I think that's a good point also, that even let's say your sister is an editor, it doesn't mean that she is the best editor for you, because it's really going to change depending on how they have a relationship with you. Are they afraid of hurting your feelings? In my job with New Shelves, as we are marketing and evaluating people's covers and things, I make people cry probably once a week. Not on purpose, I'm sorry, but it's because I would rather be honest in the safe space of my work and office than send you out and just get, negative feedback right and left. So I think it's important that you find someone that is comfortable being honest with you, because sometimes we need to hear the hard truth.
Absolutely. And, there are better ways to do that than not. I wouldn't want to work with someone who, had that proverbial ruler. That would be terrible. Feedback can be both constructive and gentle, but it absolutely does need to be honest. And so working with someone who can be both gentle and honest, and let's face it, it should be fun. Let's have fun together. While we're in the revision phase, while we're writing that book, it shouldn't be drudgery. If it is, why are we doing this?
Right.
Let's enjoy somebody and laugh.
Right. If you're not making millions of dollars off your book and you're doing this as a labor of love, then keep it fun and your work will be better. I think we've all seen authors that maybe have been around for a really long time, and you read their early books and they're exciting and they're fun, and then you get to the 10th one and you're like, oh, this seems kind of dry. So I think we've all seen that for sure.
Yeah. And I'll take a side step and say, this is a book on writing that won a humor award. And I think that speaks volumes to the way that I feel about the writing process. We should enjoy it. It should be fun and funny. And, you know, I say I work with writers who take the writing craft seriously without taking themselves too seriously. Let's throw some puns out there and laugh. Language
Right.
is funny.
Yeah, you might as well. Like, it's all good. We have Patricia saying, I'm a pantser when writing children's picture books and chapter books. I often use a bubble map or a mind map to have some structure. My question is, after pantsing your novel or books, do you use your revision process to catch any plot holes? Which I think we kind of covered, that you do have to go back and revise, because there will be plot holes most likely if you're using kind of a mind map or a bubble map.
Even if you started out with an outline,
Yeah.
you still need to revise. There, you know, once ever in the history of humanity, a person wrote a book and in one sitting and it came out amazing and they didn't have to revise. I made up that statistic. I don't know if it's true. For the rest of us mere mortals with our 2 feet on the ground, yes, right, we must revise.
Right. And revise your revisions even. I mean, I think I've seen where people will add or take away, like you said, pantsers often have so much writing that they have to cut it down. As they cut down, they have to make sure that if they cut Sally out of chapter 10, did she show up in chapter 22? So you have to, no matter if you're adding or subtracting, you have to, because you could add on a plot or storyline because you didn't have enough writing, and then suddenly there's this main character that, like, you never introduced him. Like, who is this and why are they important now?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, right now we're talking on sort of the global plot level. It's really interesting. You know, I speak with literary agents and editors all the time, several times a week. And one of the ones that I met with, she's lovely. She's in Toronto. She's looking for the next Jodi Picoult. So if you're the next Jodi Picoult, let me know. But what we were geeking out on is the power of the sentence. And sentences, words are our building blocks. And so, you know, there's a revision where you're looking at the kinds of things that you're talking about, right? Like, did Sally suddenly reappear? Oops. Those are really important things to get out. But, you know, at a final revision, and I'm not talking about a copy edit. I'm not talking about like making sure your commas are where they're supposed to be placed. I'm talking about optimally using language. Have we expressed this idea in the most succinct or beautiful or concise way that we can? Is it consistent with our genre? How can we enhance our dialogue? Thinking about all of those things that are really about the tool of our craft, our words.
Right. Speaking of dialogue, there's this train of thought that dialogue is all you really need for a fiction novel, or that dialogue is what is most important in a fiction novel. Do you believe that's true?
Well, first of all, I'm going to throw out what my good friend Janet Reed, who you may also know, she's the Query Shark. She's like, don't tell me it's a fiction novel. All novels are fiction. So I'm going to put that out there first. I love her. Talk about honest. She's honest. No. If you had good dialogue and terrible prose, I'm going to say no. I mean, if it's your 18th novel and you've got a long publishing track record of sales, then maybe. But if you're a debut novelist, that's not going to be enough for you to get readers if you're self-publishing, or for you to get acquired if you're traditionally publishing. What I would say, though, that you need in a novel today is voice. So your follow-up question, of course, is, great, Annalisa, what's voice?
Right. Yeah, that one.
You know, that's something that each agent that I talk to has a little bit of a different spin on it. It's got voice. It's got voice. You know, it's kind of that elusive thing that we're looking for right now in the traditional publishing industry. And it's something that I talk a lot with my authors. You know, how can we integrate more voice? And the thing is about voice is that it's authentic, right? Like, I can't speak in Keri's voice. Keri can't speak in my voice. So part of what the trajectory is to becoming a career author is finding your voice.
Right. And you'll see that. I mean, typically you see that kind of grow or brand with a author who has multiple books out, as you will. Like, I could read mid-chapter in a book and be like, oh, this sounds like this author, because they do kind of, I mean, when they find their voice, if they use it, it does help them stay consistent throughout because it's recognizable.
Absolutely. And, I think that that's part of creative flow. I wrote this book in a month, and that was a little bit much. I was under deadline from the publisher, but it was easier because of the voice, right? It's very authentic to who I am, what I sound like right now, the stupid, corny jokes that I make, all of that is in there. And it was because I was in the flow of my voice that it was easy. Not easy, right. Easier.
Right. And so also, so we've talked a lot kind of about novels, but does pantsing work, or how is it different for and I know all books are fiction, just heard it, but if there's a nonfiction, if someone's writing a self-help book or a book on dentistry, how is it still pantsing? How does it differ from fiction and nonfiction?
I think that for nonfiction writers, there certainly could be a pantsing process, because writing, regardless of fiction, nonfiction, always is still a process of writing and organizing. For myself, personally, as a seasoned journalist, I tend to write from an outline when I'm writing nonfiction, and I am a straight out pantser when I'm writing fiction. Now, I've been writing nonfiction for a really long time, so I've got a really good flow on making my bullet points and knowing where I want an article to go. Now, I just said bullet points, right? This is not sort of the Roman numerals of your 5th grade social studies curriculum, right? So it's always writing and organizing. It's always writing and organizing. It's always writing and organizing. And find the order that works for you, that helps your brain to get into creative flow. That's my magic formula for today.
Right. And that's in your book, which we're having requests to see your full book cover. You've kind of held it up. Yes. Can you hold it right up by your face? There we go. So Storytelling for Pantsers. And it's, of course, available wherever books are sold online. So if you haven't gotten it, it's ebook, paperbacks. You can go grab it. For sure.
Yes. And there's an accompanying workbook as well for people who want to work through the exercises in the book.
Oh, so that's fun. So the workbook also. We are having questions. So I think this is fun. Randy's asking, like, you've talked about your writing gym and things like that. So what exactly, I know that you own Date with the Muse. So what exactly is that? What do you do? How do you work with authors?
Excellent question. So I take authors through the entire process. So usually authors come to me in one of two places. I finished a book and I think that it's ready to submit, or I've got all of these ideas / chapters written and I can't turn it into a book. So we can take them right from the beginning of writing that quality first draft in 8 weeks. From there, we go into the revision period, because revision is always needed and important. And once we've got a publishable draft, and we've looked at that from the standpoint of craft and also through marketability, what works in the publishing industry right now, what doesn't, questioning how we could tweak it. It's always the author's piece, but it's my job to be the guidepost and say, well, you can do that, but it's highly unlikely that a traditional publisher will be interested in this market. So we look at all of those pieces. Once we're done there, I move them into submitting for traditional publication. So I know a bunch of agents and editors, and so I'm making connections. I'm also helping them to write query letters. We got the highest compliment about 2 months ago. This agent called the author because she wanted to tell him that it was the best query letter that had ever come across her desk. I was like, oh,
that is awesome.
Yeah, and she got on the phone with us. She wanted to talk about the piece. She had requested a full manuscript. I mean, it was just really amazing. So, we signed 2 publishing contracts last week for our authors. So, I mean, we accelerate the process because we write bang up submission materials, and I can pick up the phone in a lot of cases and do some follow-up.
Right, which is amazing. So you really concentrate on helping people write or refine their novel or they're self-fiction, not self-fiction, nonfiction, and then you are helping them get to traditionally published in most cases. Do you work with self-publishing much, or is it mostly pushing people to traditional?
I've worked with self-published authors. You know, in a lot of cases, it's a pet project, something that's really important to them. For example, I had a grandma who wanted to write her memoirs for her grandkids, right? And so
Yeah,
it's obviously something that's not going to be targeted to traditional publishing. That's not the purpose of the piece. And so we wrote her memoir together. So there have been cases like that. People who are really serious about wanting that self-published career, who really want the readership into the tens of thousands, and so they need that quality book to sell. You know, certainly I've worked with those authors before as well. And over on the nonfiction side, I've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs to write their expert books to highlight their expertise.
Right. And that's how we've actually come together and worked together, is because while you are amazing at getting quality content and books out, we've worked together on marketing, because that's what New Shelves really takes over at. That's where we like, and that's where our market is in actually marketing to bookstores and libraries. So we like working with you, because you do, it's so much easier to market a quality piece when there's really quality behind something. The first time that you put out a book that has poor editing, or that it doesn't, and then a library calls you up and says, hey, you recommended this book, but I just read through one chapter and there's errors right and left, and suddenly it's like, oh. So that's why it's so important that there are different people that specialize in different parts of writing and publishing.
Absolutely. And I couldn't do the work that I do with my authors without your support on the marketing side. It's amazing what you carry. It's really amazing.
Well, thank you. We love, like I said, we love working with you with books that are polished and refined. We have a question from Jim. If I'm looking for a developmental editor, where do you suggest I find them? Is there a way to know if a editor is good or should be trusted? And how do you set up your authors with editors?
Yes. So I'm going to start from the end and go to the beginning in true Pantser style. So all of our editorial staff is in-house. So right now I am the main editor for, the only editor for my authors' pieces. If you're looking for a developmental editor, I can tell you the frustrations that people come into my program with, of experiences that they've had in the past. So one of them is about experience. And so let's start with people who are authors offering to edit your piece. Just because they're able to write a publishable piece for themselves doesn't mean that they understand how to give feedback on a piece. Now, it seems like they should be able to, but it's not a one-to-one correspondence. So an author, a published author, might be a good editor, but may not be. Secondly, what is their area of expertise? And so this question, you know, you said earlier, Keri, but I had it edited. You know, I've had writers come to me and say, but I've had it edited. Well, that may be true, but it's not edited to what the publishing industry is looking for. And when I say the publishing industry, I'm thinking about traditional publishing, but you know, on the self-publishing side, you also have to think about what the market can sustain. Do people want books that have lots of typos? No, they don't. Do they want stories that are overly long for the genre, or that don't make sense within the context of the genre, that don't follow the tropes that we're looking for in that genre? Those are just some of the questions that we need to look at when we're thinking about positioning a piece in the market. So, you know, that's a lot of hats for a developmental editor to wear, but they're all really important hats. So just because someone was an English teacher or a librarian, they're not necessarily going to be, and I'm saying that because people come to me and that's their story. Like, you know, my old teacher, or the librarian from my high school, or, you know, those are all people who love words and love books, but they're not going to be the kind of editor that's necessarily going to get you where you want to go. So it's really important. Sorry, this is a really long answer, but it's really important to know where you want to go
Yeah.
You know, if you just want to have memoirs for your grandkids that don't have typos, it's a very different proposition than I'd like Simon and Schuster to publish my book.
Right.
Those are very different propositions. So know what you want and then
Yeah.
find the right guide to help you to get there.
I think that that last part about finding what you want, and because there are so many people who say, I just want to get out there before I die. If I die tomorrow, I want to know that I got my memoir out there, that I got this poetry out there. And if that's the case, then your whole process will be different from someone who says, I want to be a career author with Simon and Schuster, or Forge for thrillers and mystery. Having that kind of mindset makes a big difference. And kind of to tag along on that is, if you do want a career with tens of thousands of readers or with a big publishing house, you have to be patient. That even if you can write quickly, the process is generally pretty slow.
Very slow. People are really surprised, you know. So you spend however many years writing it and then revising it and then submitting it. And then you're like, yay! And now it's going to be 2 years till I can have my book. That's just the reality of the way that it works.
Right. And how long on average, now this is just for you and your clients, obviously, but when you're working with someone through the writing process and refining it, how long do you typically work with people? Does it depend on if they're just starting writing or revising? Is this like a long-term relationship, or is this like a short-term program when you work with people?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it really depends on the experience of the author, the length of the manuscript. You know, part of it is, are we adding? Are we deleting? Because those are two different processes. And, you know, if we need to add, well, then we're writing additional information. Where does that fit? How do we put it in? If we're deleting, then we're looking at the whole and really starting to think, okay, what are the plot lines? How are they consistent throughout, right? We need to take a real global look at the entire plot. So, you know, a quick revision would be 3 months, a long revision would be 12 months, and everybody fits somewhere within that time frame. I always say creativity is wonky. And, you know, here's another thing that I've noticed about the developmental editing process. Most editors that writers tell me about, you sort of send them X number of pages, they send them back with notes, you fix it. You send them some more pages, they send them back, you fix it. Is not how I work. So I'm doing this, what we're doing right here, Keri, every single day with my authors. We're bringing up the pages. We're talking about, okay, so if Bob went over here, then, you know, okay, Sally's going to say this. All right, so what are some other things that could happen here? How can we, if we want to get him over here, how can he, right? So we're having a conversation about your book. And I'm doing that twice a week with all of my authors. It's a very intimate process. It's a very vulnerable process where my authors can ask me questions. They can trust me to be honest with them, but also to be really careful with their feelings and their fears and to understand them as people. So what that does is that they grow, they finish a book, they publish a book. Those are all wonderful, amazing things that we want them to do. But more importantly, they're growing as writers so that they have the resilience that they need for book 2 and 8 and 16. And they've got the craft skills that they need for book 2 and 8 and 16. And that's the most gratifying part of the process that I go through.
Yeah, and I love that because not too many authors are like, I just need my one great book and then I'm done. That's it. Good. Most people really want to continue writing. That's their dream. Many people, their dream is to quit their day job and go on to writing. So I think what you said there about honing their skills overall and making them a better writer and developing that is an incredible partnership, because that is something that will stay with you. An editor who gives you one-time feedback, they are needed and they are valuable, but it's a one-time and then you're done. Having someone to sit down with you and say, okay, we've got these plot holes. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about this backstory. Or, your character kind of changed. What was going on here? And that is something that I find so many writers are, when they're moving from writer to really trying to put a book together, those are the things that they want to work on and develop. And having a partner or a mentor to carry you through that is huge. Otherwise, you kind of just get stuck in your head with
Mhm.
and then you get that writer's block because we're afraid it's all rolling together.
Right. Well, and this is just coming to me now as you're talking about this, but I'm going to put this on my website. Like, most editors work with manuscripts, and I work with authors.
Oh, just brand that right now. Go do it. I love that. And I think that's a important distinction, that almost, instead of just developing a manuscript, you're helping develop authors, which is huge. I mean, that's a huge investment. Now, of course, we're getting all these questions. If we want to work with you, where do we find you? How do we talk to you?
Absolutely. So my website is Date with the Muse. I'm not the Muse, by the way. Datewiththemuse.com. And I'm happy to speak with any of you. I do hour-long talks where we can talk about where you are, where you'd like to go, and how you can get there. And if you'd like to do that, totally available. It's datewiththemuse.com/book-a-call. All one smashed up word, book a call.
Wait. Oh, book a call.
Book a call, yeah.
I totally made that up as like a different word in my head. I'm typing this in here for you guys. datewiththemuse.com/book-a-call, which is great that you have that and the availability. So if you would like to talk to Annalisa more about her services, just go to datewiththemuse.com. You can also buy her book, which, hold it up one more time. Model that book, girl. Love it. Which also has a workbook, which I think is really valuable, because if you're reading it and you are really stuck, having something that kind of prompts you. I'm one of those people that if I read something, it's like, it goes like this. It's like, phew. But if I actually have to write anything down, then it somehow cements in my mind. So I love that you've got a workbook.
Yes.
We've just got a couple more questions here. One of the questions I have is about branding. When you are deciding to write a book, does branding matter? And how is it important to stay within one genre, or can you kind of explore a plethora, or does that hurt your chances as an author?
Oh, that's a bunch of questions all in one. I'm going to start with the genre question. So if you're looking to traditionally publish, traditional publishers like you to stay in one lane. So if you've chosen epic fantasy, you will evermore be an epic fantasy author. So when I work with authors, one of the first conversations that we have is, because, we're writers, we're creative types, right? We write mysteries and fantasy, and we're all over the place because that's creativity. But one of the first conversations that I have is, if you only get to pick one genre and one genre only for the rest of your life, it's like a marriage ceremony, who do you pick? Because if you get niched into that one genre, you're going to have to be in love for the rest of your life. So now look, there are authors who are able to transcend genre boundaries, but it's awfully difficult, right? J.K. Rowling did it. Stephen King did it. But look at the sales that they have. They have name recognition where they can genre hop, and that's okay. Other authors have done it. Sometimes you have to get a new agent. Sometimes you have to write under a pen name. You're basically starting your career all over again when you genre hop. So it's tough. It's tough. Mm-hmm. Now that question is a little bit different from the brand question. And Keri, I'm going to let you hop in because you're the expert in branding, but I can tell you where we start with authors. When you're an author, you absolutely want to create a brand around your name, right? So it exists out there, annalisaparent.com. don't go and look for it. It's going to redirect you to datewiththemuse.com anyway. But it's there. I own that domain for my author life. And you should create a brand around your authorship. That's a long, complicated process. If you're self-publishing, then you absolutely need to talk to Keri at New Shelves. If you're traditionally publishing, your publisher is going to work with you to create some of that branding and then expect you to then work on some of the marketing yourself, in which case you should also call Keri at New Shelves for some help. But I wouldn't put too much pressure on yourself when you're writing a book to start making those big branding questions. If it feels like a gigantic headache and you just like you're staying up at night worrying about it, have a chat with Keri about it, and she'll walk you through some things that you can start with at the beginning to really, start your author brand.
Yeah. I did not pay her to say that, by the way. And I think so for branding, I think the most important thing, like you said, is to brand your name, because branding your name can never be bad. Whether you're in the writing process, you're published traditionally, no matter where you go, branding your name can never hurt. Branding your name on social media and having it consistent, and go by a URL. Whether you do anything with it, own the rights to it, to your name or something as close to it as possible. I know if your name is John Smith, johnsmith.com is probably taken. But you might be able to get John Smith author or John Smith writer. So it's never going to hurt you. And to have that, whether it's developed or not, can only help you later down the road when you are ready to brand. Because like you said, even if you are being traditionally published, you are expected to brand yourself. And yes, your publisher will help to an extent, but we work with traditionally published authors who go, they told me to get a website, they got me this, and then they said, go do it. And so that's why it's so important that you do realize that writing is one part, publishing is another, and marketing is a third. And you have to have them all if you want to be successful. You can't really successfully market something that wasn't written well. Publishing, if it's not done well, guess what? Marketing's not going to happen. If you haven't gone through the proper steps to get your published work to be professional, it's going to be really hard to market, because people in the industry know what to look for. I love when people say, well, no one else can tell that it was self-published. And I said, it's got this, and this. I can tell. And if I can tell, I guarantee you that the librarian, the bookstore, the agent can tell. So it's important that you kind of look at them as three separate steps, that no matter if you're traditional, indie, or somewhere in between, that you have to look at all of those things to be successful as an author.
I love that you mentioned that, Keri, because I talk about this a lot, and I use this professional sports analogy, right? So imagine that I, in this outfit, show up to try out for the NBA. Now, you can't tell that I'm 5 feet tall, but I am, right? So I'm 5 feet tall. I'm in street clothes. I'm a woman. Like, the people who are trying out athletes for NBA are going to know that I don't belong there. I'm in the wrong room, right? And writers do this kind of thing all of the time, thinking that they're going to pull the wool over the eyes of people who are professionals and know what it's supposed to look like. And you don't know that, but you look like little tiny Annalisa, the woman showing up in street clothes at the NBA tryouts.
Yeah, and exactly. And most of the time you get one shot in front of the people that you want to impress. And if you don't take that one shot and wow them, then you're done. Whether it be an agent, a bookstore, a library, like, they're not going to waste their time on you a second time. So it's important that you get that all together from the get-go. Put the time in first. Don't rush things, which again leads back to the writing process and the revision process, and how you said it can take 3 months to a year to revise a book. And I know, like NaNoWriMo and different things like that, they're like, oh yeah, write your whole book in a month. Great. Write it in a month, but realize that doesn't mean it's finished. That just means that you've gotten your first draft on the page. And there should be many drafts in between. So
yeah. One of my favorite stories is about William Zinsser, who wrote the book On Writing Well, which is one of my favorite writing guides. And I think I have the 15th or the 17th edition of that book. And he died within the last 5 years, and so we're done with new editions. But the point is that here's a man who wrote a book called On Writing Well, who perpetually revised that book so that it could always be the very, very best version of itself. And I find that to be just a statement of the power of revision, that it absolutely is necessary, that we can always be improving our writing. Now, on the flip side, the other thing that I say to my writers is, it's never done, it's just due. Like, we could revise and revise and revise and only ever revise and never put it out there. At a certain point, we have to say, okay, this is done. It's never going to be perfect, but it is done. But it is important to look at a piece and really try to do the very best job that you can.
Right. I love that. If you are talking to someone who's writing a query letter, what is your one piece or best advice for someone writing a query letter to make a big impression?
Don't send the same query letter to every single agent.
So don't copy and paste.
No copying and pasting. When you're applying for a job, I hope that you're individualizing your letter to the position, to the company that you're applying for. You might be rearranging your resume to highlight the skills that are relevant to the job post that you're applying for. Well, a query letter is the cover letter and resume for your book. So apply for that job properly. Yeah.
And personalize it. Don't just say, hi, agent, or hello. Say, this is when you say, hi, Gina, I've been following you for a long time because you are in whatever genre it is. Make it personal. Let them know that you have taken an interest and that you've taken the time to look them up. Just again, like you would in a interview. You don't go into an interview. I'll actually say many moons ago, I worked for a company that manufactured contact lens. And I was a receptionist. And so this was a long time ago. I was a receptionist, and we got a resume in saying that they just thought that chicken plucking was a very cool job, and they really wanted to interview for this chicken plucking job because it was so exciting. So what they had done is they'd taken this resume and they specialized it for one person and then sent it out to a bunch of people. And so this person did not get an interview because we did not in any way have chickens on the premises unless they were for lunch. Right. So I think it's important. Not only did we laugh, but it was also like, man, this person really didn't care. Yeah. And that's not the impression you want to give when you're sending in a query letter.
Absolutely. And I think, one of the points that you made there was around the address of the letter. And one of my favorite stories, one of my friends is the editor at a children's book publishing house, and it's all women on staff, it just happens to be. And they get about 50% of their query letters every year say, "Dear Sirs." So, these are people who they don't even know who works at the publishing house. So
right.
It doesn't reflect well on you.
Yeah, no work has been done. I love that. So one final question, and then we're about to wrap up because we want to respect your time that you've just given us today. But one question is, do you help people publish stories, like short stories or smaller pieces for magazines, or do you only work on full-length books and novels?
I do help people work with short stories. Often when I'm at like the Writer's Digest conference, I'm working with shorter pieces like that. It's an important part of building your author brand and your author platform to get those short stories out there. Maybe short stories are the only thing you want to write, and you're looking to publish an anthology eventually, in which case you should be publishing short stories. Maybe you're looking to publish a novel, but you need to have your name out there in the marketplace, in which point you should be publishing short stories. So it's always a good thing to work on, and I'd love to chat with people who are looking to publish short stories as well.
Okay, that's great. And again, you can go right over to datewiththemuse.com, and that's where you can find Annalisa. You can do datewiththemuse.com/book a call to actually talk to Annalisa. And thank you so much for joining us. I know that our authors have gotten so much benefit from you and your writing expertise, because it's just something we don't do at New Shelf. Someone asked me how to write something. I'm like, I don't know. I judge it. I don't help you write it. But so thank you very much. And hold your book up one more time so everybody can see it. She's going to like sore arm muscles from this. So Storytelling for Pantsers. Go get Annalisa's book. She's got a workbook as well. And reach out to her. We fully love Annalisa and Date with the Muse. They're doing such great work with writers. Jim, again, straight over to Date with the Muse. That's where you can get in contact with Annalisa. I'm sure she'd love to connect. And that's it for today. This is Free Advice Friday. I'm Keri Barnum, the executive director for New Shelves Books. Next week, we have another special guest, Barb Bahinsky, and Barb is a career author who has a series. So we're going to be talking to her and picking her brain about how she really took off as an author and moved into quitting her full-time job as a lawyer to write full-time. So we're very excited for that. We hope that we see you then. If you have questions, send them over in advance to questions@freeadvicefridays.com. And again, Annalisa, thank you, thank you, thank you. We appreciate you. And datewiththemuse.com is Annalisa's website. Thank you guys. We'll see you again soon. Bye.